So now we want to use our Markdown files in the posts folder as a data source. For example, for the starting page here, instead of using dummy posts, we want to fetch our posts from that posts folder. For example, with help of getStaticProps. Now, before we do that, I'll first of all create a new folder in the project though, a lib folder or helpers folder, whatever you want to call it. And in there, I'll add posts-util.js file. This simply is a file which will have extra utility functionality for fetching my post data and for extracting metadata from those Markdown files. And speaking of that, for this we need to install another extra package. So quit your running development server and install an extra package with npm install, and that would be the gray-matter package. That's a package which allows us to read a Markdown file and split it into metadata and the actual Markdown content. Once that's installed, we can start the development server again. And now in posts-util.js, I want to add a couple of functions that fetch us all posts, all featured posts, and then also a single post. Now let's maybe start with all posts. Let's add a getAllPosts function here. The idea here is that we take a look at this posts folder with the Markdown files and simply check how many Markdown files we have there, and then go through all those Markdown files to get the metadata for all those files. Now, for going through all those files here, I will work with the file system, and hence we should import fs from fs. So import this fs node module. And then here in getAllPosts, I'll start by reading all the content from a directory with the fs module and the readDir-sync method. readDir-sync will read all the content synchronously, so in a blocking way, which is fine here because I want to parse all posts anyways before I do anything else. So I'll read the entire content of a directory in one go here. Now we need to pass a path to the directory to readDir-sync, and I'll create this as a separate constant outside of all those functions here. I'll name it posts directory, though of course the name is up to you. And then here I'll import another thing from Node.js. I'll import the path module here. This allows me to construct an absolute path with the join method. And here I join process.currentWorkingDirectory, executed as a method, which will point at the overall project folder, as you learned, not at this lib folder, but at the overall project folder. So that is then an absolute path to the overall project folder. And then I'll add posts as an extra folder into which it should dive. So this posts folder here. That's then an absolute path to my posts directory, and that's the directory I want to read. So that's what I pass to readDir-sync. Now this will return an array of strings, as you see. In the end, it will be an array of file names. So here I have my post files, which I load with readDir-sync. As a next step, I now want to go through all those post files and dive into them to extract metadata and Markdown content. I also want to derive a slug, which can be put in the URL from the file name. So basically, I want to use the file name without the extension, which still is part inside of post files at the moment. Now for this, I'll add an extra helper function, getPostData, sounds like a fitting name, and here I expect to get the file name as an argument. Now in getPostData, we want to read the content of a file. We can again do that with the fs module, and there we have that readFileSync method for reading the content of a file. Here we need the file name, but not just the file name, we still need the full path to that file. So I'll construct my file path here by again using path.join, and I'll join this posts directory path, with which we already have, with that file name. So that constructs a full absolute path to that concrete file. Now we can use this file path for reading the content of that file. We can also add a second argument here and make it clear that the file encoding is UTF-8, so that we support all those Unicode characters. Then we get the file content here. That's what readFileSync produces. Now we're doing this for a single file here, so I'm not doing this in a loop or anything like this. I'm just doing this for one file. We're going to call getPostData in a loop for all files later though. But here we then have the content of a single file, and now we know that in a single file we have this metadata and the actual content. Now the overall content is what Node.js extracted for us. To split it up, we'll use this gray matter package which we installed. So for this, I'll import matter from gray-matter like this. And matter is simply a function which we can call here, to which we pass a string. And our file content is just a string. It's the content of a file as text. So we pass the file content to matter, and matter will then return an object with two properties. With a data property for the metadata, so a data property which contains the metadata as a JavaScript object, and a content property which contains the actual content, the markdown text, as a string. So we can use object destructuring to pull these two properties out of the returned object and store them in separate constants, data and content. And these names are not up to you. These are the properties in that object created by matter, so by this matter function. Now that we got that, we can prepare our own post data object, which should contain all that metadata and that content, but also contain an extra slug field with the slug, so with the file name without the file extension. For this, I'll first of all create my post slug here, and we can easily create this by using our file name and simply replacing the file extension with nothing. We could use a regular expression here to select the markdown extension with this regular expression and replace it with an empty string. So this removes the file extension in the end. That leaves us with a slug, which is just the file name without the extension. And therefore, of course, you should make sure that your file names do have this slug format and do not contain any special characters or whitespace. And once that's done, we can prepare that post data which we return. Here I want to add a slug field and store my created post slug. I will then also spread my data in there. So the data we extracted from the markdown file, and I'll add a content field and point at the content extracted from markdown. And of course here we can use the shortcut. So that's now an object containing the data for a single post read from that markdown file. And that's what I want to return here in getPostData. Okay, so now we have that getPostData function. We have getAllPosts where we get all those files. Now we want to call getPostData for every post we got here in getAllPosts. So there we can of course just create a for loop to go through all the post files we have here, like this for example. And for every file, we want to call getPostData and pass the post file, so the file name in the end, to getPostData. And since in there we use readFileSync, we will block the further loop execution until we parse that data. And that will be super fast, no worries. So that will not take long. It will be milliseconds. So then here we get our post data like this for a given post. And overall, we now want to create an array of post data pieces. So an array of such post objects. And therefore, we can actually also change this a little bit. In the end, what we want to do is we want to map our array of post files into an array of post data objects. So we could also just use post files and call map to execute some logic on every post file, and in the end, just return get post data for the given post file. So then we would map our array of file names into an array of objects with the actual data for those different posts. And I think that makes more sense. Now map returns a new array. It does not change the existing array, so I will create a new all posts array, which is an array full of post data. Now maybe we also want to sort that so that we have the latest posts first, and hence I'll call all posts sort here to sort my posts. And I'll add my own sorting function here where we get post A and post B. And in the end, we want to now check if post A.date is greater than post B.date. And if that's the case, return -1, otherwise return 1. That's the default JavaScript sort method, which will make sure that posts with a greater date, so more recent posts, are actually sorted in front of older posts. That also returns a new array, the sorted posts array, and that's now what I'll return here inside of this getAllPosts function. Now that was a lot of work, but I hopefully could make it clear what happens. But with that, we have the getAllPosts function, which reads all the posts in the posts folder, no matter if that's one or multiple posts, and then gets all the data for those posts and also sorts them and then returns them. Now to finish up the work on this file, I now just want to add one other function which is responsible for getting all the featured posts. So I'll name it getFeaturedPosts. And here, I'll first of all get all posts again by calling getAllPosts. So that's simple. And then I'll just find out what my featured posts are by taking all posts and filtering them by calling filter on them. So here I'll then look at every single post and simply check if post is featured, if that's true. If it's true, we'll keep it. If it's false, we'll drop it. So featured posts then only contains the posts where is featured is set to true. And then I'll return this here. That means that we still go through all posts first, but we'll have to do it anyways. We'll have to look into every file anyways to find out whether it's featured or not. If you don't want to do that, you would have to keep an extra data source around, something like a JSON file, which holds the slugs of all the featured posts, and then you would just read those and then just pull the specific Markdown files which this extra JSON file points at. That could be an alternative for a bigger blog with hundreds or thousands of posts to increase the build performance a little bit, but for this blog, this approach is absolutely fine. So now we got all of this, and now as a last step, I'll export the getFeaturedPosts and the getAllPosts functions because we will need those to fetch that data.